Hello, my name is AVERY Adams, and for my Entomology 322 project, I'll be making a mixed berry mead at home. Mead is an alcoholic beverage comprised of honey, water, sometimes fruit, and yeast, of course, for fermentation. The production of mead is considered one of the oldest forms of alcoholic fermentation and dates all the way back to 6500 BC China. The beverage has become a staple of cultures around the world, especially in places like Nordic countries and Ireland. The way that this process works is that the yeast in the mead converts the sugars in both the honey and the fruits into alcohol through the process of ethanol fermentation. The alcohol content of mead can vary from around 3% on the low end to around 20% on the high end, but typically sits around 12 to 14% for most meads. Meads can also come in varieties of flavors and styles depending on the honey, fruits, and spices added to the mead. This can cause it to become dry or sweet depending on how much honey is used as well. Raw and unfiltered honey is typically considered the best kind of honey to use when making mead. Typically, you would also like to use wine yeast when making mead, but today I will be substituting that with Fleischmann's active dry yeast because I saw on a website that this is the best substitute if you cannot find brewer's yeast. I will be using orange peels and lemon juice as a replacement for yeast nutrients to keep the yeast healthy and alive during the entire fermentation process. And for a little bit better flavor, I will be adding cold fresh cherries, dried cherries, and also dried blueberries. So to start this off, we're gonna pour a gallon of water into a large pot and heat it up to around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. We don't want this to get much hotter than that because if it does, then that can start to kill the yeast during the fermentation process. Once your warm water is set, the next step is to pour your honey into the water until it dissolves. You're gonna wanna pour about 3 pounds of honey if you wanna make it sweet, but if you like it less sweet, then 2 pounds of honey should be about okay. Here I got about a 5-pound tub of honey. That should be perfect. Might have honestly been a little bit excessive. Once your mead must is finished, you can finally transfer it into another container. For this, I would recommend you use a 1-gallon glass jar with an airlock, but if you cannot afford that, I find that one of these containers work just fine. This spout here can be used to release air during the fermentation process, which makes it perfect. You can also pour in your fruits before you pour in your must, which works perfectly fine as well, which is what I'm gonna do. When my fruit is in my container, I can finally pour my must into the container. Now, prior to pouring your yeast, you wanna add your orange peels and lemon juice for your yeast nutrients, and then later on, you're gonna wanna add your yeast in. And for our final step, we're just going to pitch our yeast. Just go ahead and add it in there. And then go ahead and give it a good old mix. Wanna make sure that's mixed well and good there. Yeast smells horrible, of course. Eventually, all that yeast will settle at the bottom. Once it settles at the bottom, then you're going to have to strain it all out. This takes about 3 weeks to ferment, but if you want full fermentation, then it'll be about 6 weeks. You want to strain it probably once every week or so, just to get a little bit of that scum out, but not too often so that you don't mess up the fermentation process. Keep it in a place that is kind of cool, but not necessarily cold because that'll mess up the fermentation process, but definitely not in a place that is warm.